Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you're doing fantastic. Listen, today we're going to be talking about Turbo. Where can Turbo still end up this cycle? Some people believe this coin is done for. Some people believe, this coin can still hit, 1 or 2 cents, 10 cents, 20, 30, even 50. Some people are saying even $8. I saw a few comments saying, Turbo can go to $1. Now, you know, I already kind of know where a realistic possibility is, and I also have my more optimistic price, and I also have my Moon Boy price, right? Those three, obviously, we're going to go into detail, and they depend on a few factors, mainly from the markets itself more than Turbo, if that makes sense. The thing is with Turbo, ladies and gentlemen, Turbo has kind of almost completed the game, right? It is listed on a bunch of exchanges, right? It is doing everything right. Turbo is a fully decentralized community driven, crypto, which is perfect, right? Turbo chain, working with Near Protocol. We're also working with Chainlink. We have Turbo Swap, right? We have this. We have also a bunch of spot exchange listings, right? We were we've been sitting at 120 for some time on this site. It is more close to 130, 140. And the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, we still have not been listed on Robinhood, which I believe we will. Now, look, Robinhood doesn't mean automatically everything is saved, okay? Getting listed on an exchange doesn't mean automatic pump, automatic coin is saved. Look, I'll show you 3 examples of coins that were recently listed on Robinhood just to show you why it doesn't really matter, especially at this current moment. And then we're going to dive to where Turbo can end up this cycle. So, look, Popcat, right? Popcat recently was one of the coins got listed on Robinhood. We saw, a pump, and then guess what? It's already back down to its relevant lows, most likely going to be challenging, lower lows somewhere roughly around the 85 million market cap. Okay. you know, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to hate on a coin or anything, but we could just see in terms of technical analysis, for a couple of days it was very weak. We dropped because Bitcoin dropped recently, and now it's going to be a challenge, right? If we can't find any momentum over here to swing back up to retake certain levels, right, then we will be dropping lower. It is just as simple as that. Pengu also got listed recently, and it is literally at its lowest of lows. And the thing is with this coin, it has no relevant previous structure because this thing already opened at billions in the market cap, right? So we saw it, right? This structure over here, it broke. It was never the same. We broke. It was very, very weak. Boom, failed again. A couple days failed. And then ever since then, we've just been going slowly downwards. And regardless of a Robinhood listing, this thing didn't really do anything for this coin, and it just kind of kept going lower. Peanut recently also listed on Robinhood, right? Gets listed, great. A couple days later, it's already down, and now it's lower. And the thing is, this coin is probably going to keep going lower and lower, probably until like 30 million market cap, where it's going to see some type of rebound. That is just the reality of these kind of listings, that just because we get listed doesn't mean we're automatically going to go to the moon. The market conditions are way more important. However, I will say getting listed on a bunch of exchanges, having good narratives, dabbling into other narratives like Turbo does, right? Turbo is not only in the meme coin section, it is the first ever AI created coin. So it's AI driven. We are in the AI technology because not only that, are we, because of how we were created and stuff, but also because of the whole Near Protocol, Chainlink, and everything, we're dabbling into other narratives, other purposes. We also have a lot of exchange listings prepared for when altcoin season happens, which is what you want, right? So, we're also diving into gaming, metaverse, right? We also have, certain cards where you could, swap Turbo and buy stuff with, that money. So we're dabbling into a lot of projects, a lot of narratives on a lot of exchanges. And then when it comes to, certain types of listings, there's not many more left. Only Robinhood is the big one. But ladies and gentlemen, I actually prefer that we haven't been listed yet, because the thing is, we're not going to be treated as a pump and dump, more as an opportunity to get people listed, people buying Turbo, right? Look, price, no doubt, is really, really low. We were talking about it, even though there were some kind of minor reversal signs. We talked about how, we needed major, major reversal signs for there to be any real confirmation. Because, we've been talking about recently, there's been 3 daily rejection candles here. Expect things to go lower. They went exactly lower, and now it is still looking rough. We are going to a very big relevant support, pretty much the last one there is, right? Pretty much the last relevant support. But look, we're also filling up all this imbalance, which is why Turbo also fails to hold certain prices, because there's so much imbalance that there's no real support on any of this side, right? Anywhere here there's not any real support, which is why it just kind of falls very, very quickly. Okay. But look, I believe Turbo will rebound. I believe Turbo will find its glory. I'll talk about it a little bit right now, but something like Bitcoin dominance is super relevant, which people just simply ignore. But it is the literal make or break for altcoins. Okay. We are almost at 63%, which is fantastic because we're roughly 6 to 8% away from finally getting to the point that I've been talking about for pretty much a year before we reverse, right? Go up, reverse, slam down, go sideways, most likely we did here for weeks, and before we have a huge major sell-off. Okay. Now, why is this important? Because, ladies and gentlemen, right, pretty much when altcoin season is relevant, when altcoins truly, truly, truly start consistently pumping, is from this time over here, right? When we kind of top out with Bitcoin dominance and start kind of going down, right? That is when altcoins consistently start pumping, right? Altcoins find some kind of consolidation. They go a little bit higher, they go a little bit lower, but more or less, they're kind of just in the same area. And then, those 4 to 8 weeks of big, big pumps, that's when altcoins can go from like, maybe like Render can go from $20 all the way to 90 and then it'll crash, right? So Turbo can go from, let's just say 2 cents to 20 cents and then crash. Okay. So this is why this is very, very important. Now, the big, big thing, where is Turbo going to end up this cycle, right? Because it's easy to make a price prediction when things are high, but what about when things are low? Well, first off, ladies and gentlemen, I think the worst, absolute worst case scenario would be ending up, Turbo ending up somewhere roughly near its all-time highs, okay? Which means roughly 1.2 cents, to 1.4 cents, somewhere roughly there is what I think the worst, absolute worst case scenario would be for this coin. Meaning that pretty much almost everybody at the bare minimum should either make money or break even. And even if you take a loss, it's going to be like 1 or 2% loss, which is better than losing a lot, right? That is what I think is the worst case scenario. Another scenario where I think is, if we have a weak altcoin season, is, we cycle out, we do what we have to do, but then eventually maybe we top out somewhere roughly around 2 cents because we do have this big, you can see resistance, right, built up. All right, we have big resistance, and if I do believe that altcoin season will, kind of peak, summer to early fall, then we could see ourselves going to 2 cents. Okay, now here's when things change. Okay, here's when things change. I believe Turbo has a pretty good probability, roughly 80-85% chance of it doing what it needs to do, right? Whatever. We don't need to go into details now. And then, once it recovers and kind of starts building sideways, something like, when Bitcoin dominance goes, let's say, up to 69%, right? 69%, and then it crashes down super heavily, right? During this crash is when I believe we can actually go all the way up to, this type of resistance turning into support, consolidate there for weeks. And then when Bitcoin dominance starts dropping, I mean, at least 15 to probably 25%, that is when I believe Turbo will have its massive expansion. And that is when I believe we will be seeing glory. Okay. So if I'm correct with, Bitcoin dominance going up and then it's slamming, let's say, down roughly 10% or so, Bitcoin being super high as well, market liquidity all-time high or near all-time high, then I definitely believe Turbo will recover at least to pretty much all-time highs. But since we have still so much more percentage to go in terms of Bitcoin dominance, dropping off, that is when I believe Turbo can, hit even upwards of 25 cents. Now, I know some people might not like that. Some people are really happy with that. But listen, ladies and gentlemen, you have to realize that at the end of the day, this is between a realistic and optimistic price. Full Moon Boy can be upwards of 35 to 40 cents, but you have to realize, market cap right now, we're at 120 million market cap. So even if we were to 10x right now, 1.2 billion, that is less than 2 cents. If we were to go to 11 billion, right? That like 12 billion mark, then we would be roughly at 17 cents, which that is way more probable. Okay. 17 cents is way more probable. Being over, a 10 billion market cap is way more probable, kind of overtaking Pepe in its prime. Um, Before obviously Pepe would have a new prime. That is way more likely. Now, of course, if the whole world is onto this, China, America, all the countries, we have way more liquidity than expected. That's what I mean when Turbo can start hitting 25, 35, 40 cents, even maybe upwards of 50. I think like maximum realistic is, or maximum even like pushing Moon Boy is 25 billion in market cap, right? That optimistic to Moon Boy range would be 25 billion market cap, which would be roughly like we talked about, mid 30s for the cents. So I think that is very, very, like I said, very optimistic and Moon Boy at that point. But you never know. The world can go crazy. There's expected to be much more liquidity over in the markets now and over the next couple months. All the economies, all the countries are going crazy with printing money and pumping, and the race in this crypto and that crypto, and then the bandwagon from people all around the world. I believe there's always that chance. So 35, 40 cents more on the optimistic Moon Boy side. On the realistic side, I think we could definitely be hitting roughly that, like the 15 cent, 20 cent mark. And after that, it's more optimistic. And then, like I said, once we start getting to 30s, 35s, we start entering the Moon Boy, upwards of 50 cents. $1, no. 70 cents, no. 50 cents, probably full Moon Boy. Realistic also Moon Boy, because then you don't want to be a delusional Moon Boy where you say, something goes up to $10 because then, or $1, because market cap at that point would be really, really ridiculous. We would have to get to like roughly 70 something billion in market cap. I don't see that ever happening, respectfully, for this coin. It's not that it can't, is that there's also lots of other meme coins, and only like what Doge has hit that kind of market cap in its prime. So yeah. So 20 to 30 cent is where I'm looking for this coin to top out. Even anything below slightly, I would still be really happy with those profits. But yeah, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys did enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.